So what we have here is one Toshiba Satellite L55t laptop computer, which I bought about 9 months ago. Thought I got a great deal on it at the time, especially since I got about $200 off of the normal price with sales and rebates. It's got a 1 terabyte hard drive, 6 gigs of memory, a touch screen. I was somewhat satisfied with it. My only complaint was that the screen viewing angle was pretty much zero. Other than that, it was a pretty good laptop until one day when I noticed that the corner of the LCD panel here had separated, kind of like that. I tried to squeeze it back together and it would not squeeze back together. There was something in the way inside. So instead I popped the edge of the panel apart a little more like this and pulled it apart to see what was inside. I thought maybe there was a wire out of place or something. And what should happen but a little screw fell out. Pretty great. You know, that's a screw that holds the hinge or something inside. Well, maybe I can take it apart and put the screw back in, and maybe I'll have to put a little Loctite on or something so it'll stay in the future. But then I looked a little closer at the screw and found that on the back side of the screw is the plastic and the little threaded insert that used to hold the screw in place. So this wasn't going to be a simple repair job as I thought it was. So I've already been inside this thing a couple times. First thing I did was to just glue that plastic piece right back in place, but I knew that wasn't going to cut it, so I used epoxy putty that comes in a little pellet. It's 2 parts of different kinds of putty. You knead it together and it hardens like epoxy over time. I put that around where each of these screws and the little threaded insert and the plastic goes. I glued them back in place and put the epoxy putty around it to reinforce it. That lasted about 2 days and it broke again. Found out that the epoxy putty really isn't very strong. I scraped it all right back out with a X-Acto knife. My second attempt was to glue the pieces back in place and just use normal 2-part epoxy to kind of, you know, reinforce them and hold them back in place. And that lasted a little longer, but in the end it broke again, and basically the hinge is loose inside the panel. You see if I push the panel back, it pops it open. I left the plastic on there, on the threaded insert, and glued it back in place because I wanted to be able to locate the little nut in the proper spot. But it appears that isn't going to work because it just pulls back out of the epoxy. The little threaded insert, the way that normally works is when they injection mold a plastic part, they put the little threaded insert like on a pin or something and then close the mold and inject the plastic in, and it flows around the little threaded insert, which has, like, it's knurled on the outside. It has grooves in it so that the plastic can flow into the grooves and it can be locked in place and stay there. When I just glued it back in place and put epoxy around it, well, that didn't really work in that manner. So I think what I'm going to end up having to do is to break all the plastic off that threaded insert, figure out how to locate it right in the back proper spot, and then epoxy it back in, and then hopefully without the old plastic around it, it'll actually stay where it belongs. So you see what happens here when I try to close it, the hinge doesn't even go down right. It pops the LCD panel open and you can see it pulling on wires and all sorts of bad things happening there. Okay, so let's start taking this thing apart and seeing what we can do with it. Battery is not supposed to be replaceable by the user. It's screwed in. One thing with this laptop is, since the battery is not supposed to be removable by the user, they didn't seem to bother to put a CMOS backup battery in it. So now that I've removed it, Next time I boot this thing up, it's going to tell me that the date and time is gone and all the CMOS, BIOS settings are gone, and which doesn't really matter because I'll just hit defaults and save and exit, and that's about it. There we go. Yours may not pop apart that easy. This one's been into several times already. One of the fun things of working on this is getting all the dust and fingerprints off the inside before you put it back together. Here's the broken hinge. Totally loose. Nothing holding it in place any longer. Get those out of the way. Yeah, there we go. One on this side has one good screw left, and you see there's a piece of foil here that used to connect to some shielding behind the panel, and the plastic and the threaded insert that used to be attached to the plastic here. You can see the epoxy around where I tried to glue these parts in back in here before. This corner piece here used to be attached to a piece of frame that went around the panel, but with all the torquing and twisting of the hinges, that's broken loose now too. I don't know why they thought they could screw this hinge down to this plastic like this and expect that to hold in place. I mean, that's just crazy.